to have been invited here to the AILU's National Conference. This is not the first time that I'm speaking on your national platform. There was Madurai way back, I think about 10 years ago. And it's also important to me because the kind of theme you are covering, Save Democracy, and is one in which I think lawyers and journalists are going to have a tremendous task cut out for them. I'm not sure that we are performing or living up to what's expected of us, but it is incredibly important. And I certainly know that lots of journalists will be needing lots of lawyers fairly soon. So I think it's a good thing for me to be here. You know, if the 1975 emergency, there's been a lot of discussion on whether this is an undeclared emergency, or I want to say something very straight to you. I was then General Secretary of a students' union in the South. I will say this: the emergency saw the consolidation of the state as authoritarian. Today, we are seeing the emergence of the state as sociopath. I mean, I'm not being polemical. I believe that because the need of the sociopath, it is not enough to defeat your adversaries. It is absolutely important to humiliate, torment, ruin, publicly destroy them, having defeated them. So I think that's the difference between the authoritarian and the sociopath. And what we are witnessing, I believe, is the track of the sociopath. When you throw out 146 MPs from Parliament for an entire session and you ram through the laws, criminal laws, I do not believe it was necessary to do that. I don't believe, they could have passed those laws anyway. They could have passed those laws anyway, but they threw the MPs out because they could. You hurt someone because you can. That is the sociopath. You inflict humiliation, damage, physical, mental, moral, emotional, on your adversary. And that, I remember one instance earlier which was slightly different. When the 3 farm laws were rammed through Parliament, incidentally, the laws on India's largest sector were never drafted in Parliament, were never put before a standing committee on agriculture, were never put before a special committee. They were drafted in corporate boardrooms, brought to the Parliament, and you threw out 8 members of Parliament, including 3 who were sitting perfectly quietly like Bibi Ragesh. You could see it from the television footage. Why did they need to throw out those? That was a different situation. They were not sure whether their laws were going to pass in the Rajya Sabha. And the funny thing is, you throw out the 8 MPs, even then you don't have a vote division. You have a voice vote. Two former Secretary Generals of the Lok Sabha have clarified that there is no provision in the Constitution called voice vote. Voice vote is something when you have an overwhelming mood I get up and tell the speaker, can we extend lunch break by 1 hour? There will be a voice vote. Right? There is no need of division of vote. But even after throwing out 8 MPs, they chose to pass the farm laws by voice vote because they were not sure. They were not sure. Several of their own MPs had not shown up that day. But it gets more and more brazen, more and more blatant. This is my 44th year as a journalist. And I will say this, that I have not seen Indian democracy in such terrible shape ever, including during the emergency. And I have not seen so much inequality, so much fear, so much trampling on human rights and on citizens' rights. And I believe that these various issues, 3 themes at least, are connected. And we are on our way to becoming a nation living in a very delusional state. I actually argue that India has 3 pandemics, not one. The first pandemic, you all know, COVID-19. Look at how today the government, supported by large sections of corporate media, claims that India showed the world, was the world leader in COVID management. Let me tell you a few numbers. To this day, have you had a discussion in this country how many people actually died in COVID-19? WHO said 4.7 million Indians died. Lancet, the great medical journal, said 4.2 million Indians died. Johns Hopkins University, which kept lists, gave 3 different figures, all of them above 4 million. Global Development Council, Washington DC, said 4.9 million. Vishwaguru said 4,86,000, end of discussion. They have modestly revised it upwards to 5,21,000. That's about 10% of what all the global estimates were. But you cannot question it. Those of us who do pay the consequences. And there are too many, the other nature of definitive change in the nature of the Indian state. Whatever we may have put in our preamble, you are today racing towards becoming a corporate state. Let me link these for you with the subject of democracy. So anyway, there was one point in the 2020 when the media actually reported brilliantly what was happening with COVID deaths in Uttar Pradesh. Yeah, you all remember worldwide the scenes, thousands of bodies on the banks of the Ganga, the Sarayu and other rivers. For 1 month this reporting lasted, and then they pulled the plug. All the media that were forcefully reporting went silent simply because the government of Uttar Pradesh and the central government pulled the plug on government advertising. That's it. The government advertising plug was pulled. Everybody went silent except one publication. To their eternal credit, Dainik Bhaskar continued to report, and what happened? They were visited by ED, IT, any passing by agency on the street was invited to join the raids. everybody got the message. Everybody got the message. After that, there was no serious reporting on what happened. Let's look again. This was by pure terror, by intimidation, which is not how a democracy functions. Please remember, at the end of the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, the Attorney General was Solicitor General, who filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court. I quote, "There is not a single person on the highways today, March 31st, as of 11 a.m., there is not a single person on the highways." That is the government of India submitting to the Supreme Court. There is not a single person on the highways. We now know that more than 20 million people were on the highways for the next 4 months. And how do we know that? Because it is in the nature of government that one department will put out its own public press release on May 25th. Indian Railways, and I salute the Indian Railways, put out the figure. In the last 25 days, lockdown starts, migration start on March, on March 24th, 25th midnight. But on May 25th, Railway says in 25 days, we have transported, you remember the special Shramik rail, we have transported 9.1 million workers, almost 1 crore workers in 25 days. And that is after the peak of the migrations. And incidentally, anyone who knows public transport and railways in India, when they say 91 lakhs people we transported, it actually means that 91 lakh tickets were distributed. In India, the public have a very healthy attitude towards public transport. If 200 people travel, about 40 tickets, 30 tickets will be purchased. So if 9.1 million tickets were there, it tells me that 1.2, 1.3 crores people traveled on those trains. Our correspondents from the People's Archive of Rural India, of which I am the founding editor, traveled with migrants from March, April 2020. Now, since it started coming out that there are migrants on the streets and on the highways, the same Attorney General appears before the same Supreme Court 14 days later and says governments have opened, look at that, plural, governments have opened 23,000 food and relief centers. First, he fails to mention that 62% of those centers are opened by the government of Kerala. 62% of all the centers in that country were in Kerala. Second, he does not explain, 14 days ago you said there wasn't a single migrant on the roads. Then what are you having these 23,000 centers for? To promote tourism. What for are you having those centers on the highways? No questioning. You don't question. The media have been trained, no more questioning. You attack anything that happens, you can question the opposition. Like every diversion has been used. There are editorials written, but the throwing out of 146 MPs has not once been made the main issue, which it is. Yeah. So, that migrations, I want to say 2 more words about it. when more than 20 million human beings got up and walked away towards their home villages, that makes it the largest exodus, the largest migrant situation in recorded human history, far greater than even what we saw in the partition. Now the largest migration in recorded human history takes place. Where do you read about it in your media? Yeah? The media and the cameras accompanied the migrants till the border of the city. After that, the media are not willing to send their willing correspondents to the villages. They'll send them to Davos at gigantic cost, but they won't send them to one district away in Maharashtra when they left Mumbai. Yeah. But Vishwaguru says 4,81,000 people died. Nobody is on the streets. That's it. No questioning. No. Yeah. You know, alongside, even months before the criminal laws, two major agreements were passed affecting the largest sector of our being, agriculture. How many of you have even heard that AgriStack, our huge central database on agriculture, how many of you are aware that ICAR has signed agreements giving a free hand for consultancy and advice to Bayer, which includes Monsanto, and Amazon. Amazon now has full access to your agricultural data. They are advising the Indian state on better delivery of inputs. But the important thing is that they are having full access to all that is important in your data in agriculture. This is not a scam. It's an outrage because it is done ostensibly legally through an agreement that the ICAR has signed. Now Bayer is a gigantic pharmaceutical company, so gigantic that it swallowed Monsanto 2 years ago. Now Bayer, Monsanto and Amazon are two of the biggest corporations in the planet. They are two of the biggest corporations. The owner of Amazon is the richest man in the planet. Okay? At least 3 times in a row he has been. Jeff Bezos. He also owns the Washington Post. So the new digital media are spreading their tentacles across America. Now, is there the kind of inequality that is developing in the country? That kind of inequality is the antithesis of democracy. You know, nearly 100 years ago, a very famous American judge, Justice Louis Brandeis, dismissed a case brought by the richest people in the United States. The richest people in the United States brought before Brandeis a case for the abolition of income tax. Actually, it has succeeded 100 years later because most big corporations pay no income tax. Apple, Microsoft, all of them have done offshoring of account profits. They paid almost zero income tax in the last 15-20 years. But very interesting what Brandeis had to say. So these richest citizens of the US called for abolition of income tax, saying it was anti-constitutional. There was no provision in the Constitution of the United States to levy income tax. It must be abolished. Brandeis said, and I think Dr. Ambedkar says it again 80 years later. Not 80, sorry. He says it 25, 30 years later. Brandeis says, you can either have democracy or you can have concentration of wealth in very few hands, but you cannot have both. You cannot have both. You can either have democracy or you can have concentration of wealth in very few hands, but you cannot have both. And he dismissed the case. He didn't put it as part of the judgment. Those were his remarks. Okay? So, he makes many such judgments in support of workers and farmers. In 1949, November 25th, in the greatest speech ever made on inequality on the floor of a legislative body in this country, B.R. Ambedkar said very much the same thing, more elaborately, more eloquently. When he said, today we enter a world of paradoxes, yeah, where we have equality in democracy, in politics, but no equality, no democracy in society and in economy. And the tension between these two will one day explode this entire edifice that this house has so assiduously worked to build. I think that's exactly where we are today. You want to look at how that inequality in the last 10, 15 years, in fact since 91, but particularly in the last 10, 15 years, has grown faster than it ever has in our independent history as a nation, and inequality income levels in 2023 are approaching those of 1921, that is the heyday of British imperialism, the heyday of the British Raj, the victorious Britain after World War I. Do you know, and I believe, by the way, I'm no lawyer, but I believe that since 1991, we have been every day, every law, in violation of the directive principles of state policy, which begin by telling us it is the duty of the state to mitigate and eradicate inequality. From 91, we have violated those principles every day of our lives. But from 2014, the race has been deadly. Let me give you a little numbers. All my figures are from the Oracle of Global Capitalism, Forbes. They put an index, the Forbes Billionaires Index. By the way, it is the only index that the Modi government does not question. It is the only index that the Modi government celebrates. Why? It shows India now ranking number 3 in the nations with maximum billionaires. Maximum number of dollar billionaires, USA, Germany, India. India is number 3. The same India that is number 3 in dollar billionaires in the world is number 132 in Human Development Index of the United Nations, falling to our lowest level ever, whereupon the government of India, Mr. Modi, the Vishwaguru's government, immediately attacked the United Nations, saying flawed methodology, bias, all this sort of stuff about the UN Human Development Index, by the way, was partly developed by a man whom they are also harassing even now, Professor Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq of Pakistan jointly developed the Human Development Index, which now ranks us at 132. We were at one stage 119, 121. We are now 132. So that index is a fraud for the Vishwa Guru. In the global hunger index, we have fallen in 121 nations on the global hunger list. We have fallen to our lowest ever. Okay? 111 out of 121. Countries like Rwanda that have had civil war for 20 years are handling their hunger problem better than we are. Immediately, attacks on the global hunger index. It's a biased Western thing. It's full of methodological flaws. These people are jealous of India because we are overtaking all of them. This is the rationalization. In the World Press Freedom Index, which I'll talk to you about for 5 minutes, my own role in it and what happened to me and what is still happening, we have fallen to the lowest ever. We were never high. We were 94 at one stage. This year, India's position in the World Press Freedom Index is 161 out of 180 nations. And that's before these new laws, before the raids on 92 journalists. So let's see what happens in March. You've fallen to 161 out of 180. And in the Environmental Press Index, another India first, we have fallen last year to 180 out of 180. The Environmental Performance Index is jointly organized by the universities of Yale and Columbia. Okay? And of course, there is deep Western conspiracy, jealousy, anything that shows, and our media, who owns the media? The richest of our billionaires own the media. It is a corporatized media like never before. Another fact you have to know, by the way, we have $174 billionaires. We did not have $1 billionaire in 1991 when we embraced the brave new world of neoliberalism. India did not have $1 billionaire. Again, now figures are from the Vishwa Guru of Global Capitalism, which is Forbes magazine. Between 91 and 2019, we built 98 billionaires. We came to rank number 6, 98 billionaires. But here is the most important thing. It took us 20 years to collect 98 billionaires. First 12 months of the pandemic, we added 42 billionaires. 42, that means in the pandemic, when 4+ million Indians died, we minted a new dollar billionaire every 9 days. Every 9 days there was a new dollar billionaire. Now, even more interesting, which sectors did the billionaires come from? Forbes will give you all this information. It's my favorite website. Okay, you can go on there and look at all our achievements. Which sector now if I say India has 160 billionaires, which at the end of the pandemic we did, 160 billionaires. Now we have 174. But at the end of pandemic, we had 160 billionaires. Now if I say, who are the Indian billionaires? Half the hands in the audience will go up saying, techies, Narayan Murthy, Nandan Nihalakani. No, actually, techies are number 3. Manufacturing is number 2. Who is number 1? Health sector. Health sector is number 1. maximum number of billionaires we added in the first 12 months came from the health sector. I do not call it healthcare sector. There is no element of care in it. You can call it health cash sector. But it is a sector from which billions of dollars have been made while millions of Indians have died. Okay? Most of our new billionaires in the pandemic came from the vaccinations, the licenses, and it is not true only of India. Happened in the US, happened in the UK, but India had the largest number of health sector billionaires in its own list in the first 12 months of the pandemic. One new billionaire every 9 days. At a time, please remember this, Indian billionaires doubled their wealth in a year where Government of India said GDP has shrunk 7.7%. If GDP shrinks 7.7%, but 160 people double their wealth to $800 billion, where did the money come from? It came from the poor. Another set of data by the Global Bank, you've all heard of Credit Suisse. They bring a global wealth handbook every year. It shows, when you want to talk about democracy, you check a democracy and a prosperous state. There are 2-3 measures. One is, how is the bottom 1/3 doing? Second, how are minorities doing? Yeah. Third, how is freedom of press doing? These are 3 very solid measures on which you can examine how democracy is doing. How is the bottom 1/3 doing? In Credit Suisse's Global Wealth Handbook, the bottom 30%, the bottom 3 deciles of Indian society own nothing. Negative. Their share of household wealth is negative. The bottom 30%. The bottom 50% is managing about 6%. Okay? The bottom 30%, its wealth, share of household wealth has turned negative. And the top 1% of Indian society owns owns a greater share of household wealth in our society than the top 1% of American society owns in America. That means our 1% are richer in their society than the top 1% in America are in the United States. That is the kind of inequality that's come up. Please also let me remind you that when the figure reached 160 in March 22, and when the government said GDP had collapsed by, shrunk by 7.7% the previous year. You know what it means? It means that 160 individuals have wealth equivalent to 24% of your GDP. 160 Indians is 0.00014% of your population, and that percent of your population controls wealth equivalent to 1/5 of your GDP or more. That kind of inequality was last seen in the heyday of the colonial Raj. Those levels of inequality. Yeah. Then let me give you one very great thing of our corporate state. In 2006 or so, when Prime Minister Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat, there was a gentleman who made his first billion. His name was Adani. In 2013, just before Mr. Modi became Prime Minister, he was worth 3.8 billion. In 2022, before the crash, he was worth $129 billion. Such a phenomenal growth rate. No billionaire in any country, not Elon Musk, not Jeff Bezos, not Bill Gates, comes anywhere close to that rate of growth. Okay? So there you are. It's a phenomenal achievement that we have concentrated wealth, and as Justice Brandeis said, and as Ambedkar said, if you have democracy in politics but not in society and economics, your democracy is on its way to collapse. That's what both of them said. Now, I was saying about the press. See, today the media are more corporate owned and corporate controlled than ever before. And I speak of a media that, I criticize a media that I worked in full time for 35 years. Okay? Last 9 years, I've been running my own publication, which is called the People's Archive of Rural India. By the way, it publishes every day in 15 languages, including Bengali. It publishes every day in 15 languages. But I think it's a ridiculous thing to call these media mainstream media. They exclude the mainstream. How do you call someone mainstream media when they exclude 80% of the population? Call them what they are, corporate. Do you know the Australian political scientist summed up, the Australian political scientist Alexander Carey summed up the history of the 20th century in 3 propositions. He said, the 20th century was marked by 3 great developments. 1, the rise and growth of democracy. 2, the rise and growth of corporate power. 3, the rise and growth of corporate propaganda to stifle the rise and growth of democracy. These were the 3 major developments of the 20th century. I think he's right. I think you can fairly, do you know that today you're all shocked when you're seeing how the New York Times and others are covering Gaza. Please understand that they very sympathetically reviewed Mr. Adolf Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf. The Times gave it a very, very sympathetic review. And the writer, by the way, was a Zionist. Okay? The reviewer, in 1936, the New York Times wrote an editorial saying, Mr. Hitler's threats and rants are more in the realm of rhetoric than reality. Okay? Already the massacres had begun. Already the purging had begun. In the Newspapers Museum of Washington, D.C., there is a documentary on the New York Times and World War II. New York Times and Nazi Germany, and it is very unflattering. Even though it's very mild, it's extremely unflattering. The fact is that when corporations own media or media functions like a corporate, the bottom line is the bottom line. What profit is the bottom line. Please note that in India, all the big media owners are big corporate owners whose wealth issues from contracts with the state, with governments, contracts which give them access to public owned resources, oil, natural gas, steel, minerals, mining. All these are publicly owned resources in India, but by being a very big corporate power through the government of India or through the relevant state government, I get access to the, it is what economists call rent-thick billionaires. they make their money out of the rents by squatting on public resources. This is very important to understand. All our major media owners fall in this category. Who is the richest man in India? I mean, today you have to toss a coin. Is it Ambani or Adani? Who is the biggest media owner in India? Ambani. Who is aspiring to be the biggest media owner in India? Adani. You look at this, so you're looking at a new non-technological convergence. In the last 15 years, the former MPs here will attest to what I'm saying. Last 20 years, major business houses have entered the media business. Major media figures have entered politics. Major business families have entered politics armed with their media power. It is what Ben Begdikian, the greatest American editor of his time, the man who published the Pentagon Papers, this sort of relationship between government, corporations, media, armaments companies, multinational banks, he called it corporate incest within corporate incest. Okay. Look, 5 years ago I looked at, 10 years ago I looked at the board of directors of Dainik Jagran. I could not find a journalist. I thought there was one journalist. He is an Irishman who doesn't know a word of Hindi, and he is from the World Association of Newspapers, Van Infra it's called, Van Infra. But he was on the board. The rest were all management people, business people. And this is not, let me not be unfair to Dainik Jagran, this is the pattern. This is the pattern. The media are a business. Now, I make a distinction between media and journalism. Mr. Samir Jain once told all of us, the media is a business like any other business. I said, I agree, but he said, journalism is a business like any other business. That I said, I don't agree. Newspapers, institutions are a business. Newspapers are a business. Radio stations are a business. Portals are a business. TV channels are a business. Journalism is not a business. In this country, journalism is a calling. Who were your greatest journalists? Gandhi, Ambedkar, Bhagat Singh. It is shocking to me that even in Punjab, people don't pay respect to the idea that Bhagat Singh was a professional journalist. That was his profession. Please read, his works are now coming out in full. Bhagat Singh was a journalist. The only Indian journalist who wrote fluently in 4 languages, Hindi, Urdu, English, Punjabi. By the way, when he came underground, he learned Bangla briefly, even wrote 1 or 2 pieces, but if you forgive me for saying so, I don't think that is ever acceptable to my Bengali friends, that someone can be a Bengali writer who is a Sardar from Punjab. Right. So, incidentally, in the last 270 days in prison, he learned 1 more language, Persian, which was an important language in the 19th and early 20th century in India. Raja Ram Mohan Roy wrote in Persian. Okay? All this, 4 languages, 5 languages. He wrote in Akali, the newspaper Akali. He wrote in Veer Arjun. He wrote in Patab. He wrote in English journals under various names. All this, 4 languages and a 5th by the time he was hanged at age 23. Okay? There is no precedent to this except perhaps in the Philippines, where Augusto Rizal had a similar career. Look at the journalists of your past. Look at the journalists of your present. Am I saying that journalism has sold out? No, media have sold out. Do you know that during this pandemic, I was very pleased with Prime Minister Modi for one evening. He declared media as an essential service, which means first time we were being called an essential service. I said thank you very much because it means essential service. You cannot sack someone. You cannot sack half the fire brigade tomorrow, right? Do you know what happened? The corporate business houses sacked 3,000 to 3,500 journalists in 2 years. When as a member of the subcommittee of the Press Council of India, we sent questionnaires to these business houses. They said it is none of your business. It is not in your purview. Press Council should stick to issues of freedom of expression. Our hiring policies have nothing to do with freedom of expression. Incidentally, how many journalists have lost their jobs or been pushed out for being critical of Vishwaguru? I don't know how many, but I do want to tell you one very, very important story coming to the second part of your democracy. What happened when India's rank started falling and I got dragged into the whole thing? This story will probably amuse you, but please understand it has serious consequences that are yet to unfold. When the India Press Freedom rank fell to 142 in March 2020, the Vishwaguru was outraged. How can anyone say that about the Vishwaguru's government, that it has brought India to the lowest level of 142? So they issued an order, meaning who issued the order? A fatwa came from the Union Cabinet Secretary. Union Cabinet Secretary, my friends, those of you who are lawyers know it anyway. Union Cabinet Secretary is the most important bureaucrat in this country. He reports only to one man. Well, in today's India, to 1.5 men. I don't know which one is the half and which one is the man. But he issued a letter to the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. A high-powered committee, the letter is available to you. It is desirable that a high-powered committee is set up to rebut this ranking and show the truth of press freedom in India, etc. Basically to rebut the ranking. Who gave the ranking? Reporters Sans Frontières, which is Reporters Without Borders, like Doctors Without Borders. It's a Paris-based NGO of journalists. So then they put together a high-powered committee, Director General, PIB, Director General, that Department of INB. Then some mischievous bureaucrat told them, "Arey, you're having a 11-member high-powered committee. You're having a 11-member high-powered committee to look at press freedom. May not be a bad idea to have 1 or 2 journalists also. Press freedom. They also have something to do with press freedom." So they invited 2 journalists to sit on the committee. I was one of them. I made my entry conditional. I said, if the purpose of this committee is to rebut the French, the Reporters Sans Frontières ranking, World Press Freedom ranking. I am not joining your committee. Yeah, because if I did a ranking, you would be much lower. So please let us do, all this is on record. I show you how it is on record. I said I will join your, if you are saying, I said I am not interested in what some Gora in Paris thinks about Indian press freedom. I want to know what Indian journalists are experiencing. Let us have hearings. Let us call journalists of Kashmir and let them say in front of the committee what is their experience of press freedom in India. Let us call journalists from Northeast. Let us call journalists from every, Northeast, West, South, Northeast and Central India and discuss what is press freedom. The chairman of the committee, very sophisticated bureaucrat, there are many. Mr. Sainath is right. We are a committee on press freedom, etc., etc., etc. And right through the committee's existence, whenever I said something, he would say, very important point must be noted. He knew and I knew that not a word of what I said would appear in the report. Okay. I got onto it for the simple reason that I believe, like I did in the Manmohan Singh government on the high-powered committee, BPL census committee, I believe someone must be there to write a note for people to know that there were other ways of doing this, that there were other ways you could have approached the problem of the BPL count. There are other ways you could approach the issue of press freedom. So I said, yes, if that is your guarantee, I am on the committee. Though he knew and I knew. We had both done the dance before together. So, we knew that it will happen. Anyway, the committee held 4 full meetings and subgroups and subcommittees. Do you know the kind of stuff that we came out with? Do you know how many laws there are in India? I am asking a bunch of lawyers. Do you know how many laws in India affect media? I am not counting the new ones. I am not counting Epidemics and Diseases Act, which they also started using against journalists. Without that, 58 laws. 58 laws in this country affect media, from the bloody Telegraph Act downwards. Okay? So it was a shocking figure even for me. I thought 20, 25, more than double of what I had thought. Anyway. The discussions took place. I was the only one speaking. All others except one man were bureaucrats. Their job was to get it done. Who was the other journalist? I shall not name him, who sat 4 hours in silence without saying a word. Have you ever heard of a television anchor who remained silent for 4 minutes? This one remained through 2 meetings. 4 hours, not a word. At the end of the second meeting, he pleaded his duties were too onerous. He had to pay attention to his work, so he could not serve. The rest of us were all vela, doing nothing, so we could do the committee work. Then comes the draft report. So I kept intervening. I spoke about, I showed a list of, there were nearly 100 FIRs filed against journalists at the time, including Samuel Raja Pandian of Tamil Nadu, who was sued, who was prosecuted for what? A story of Coimbatore General Hospital, where he said the doctors and nurses are working without proper PPE, protective equipment. Okay? Now, where could he have got that story from? Only from the doctors and nurses. Instead, the police raided his portal. They went after the photographer, the editor and the joint editor. These 3 guys absconded and went underground. You know under what law? Can you imagine under what law they were to be prosecuted? Epidemics and Diseases Act. for endangering public health by reporting that there is no PPE equipment in Coimbatore General Hospital. For your information, friends, the last journalist to be prosecuted under Epidemics and Diseases Act was Bal Gangadhar Tilak. That was Tilak, 1897-98, he was prosecuted. Okay, so we went through all these discussions. I also gave one thing which I am going to ask the lawyers to take up seriously. One of the problems of impunity in our country is that there is nothing, no punishment for false arrest. There is no punishment for false arrest. Okay? Now today, a Gautam Navalaka gets bail finally under UAPA after 4 years. He is being dragged under news case. There is no consequences for those who make false cases. With the help of Advocate Prashant Bhushan, I submitted a draft law. I submitted a draft law in the committee. I covered index monitoring cell. Essentially the argument was that if an officer, police or administrative officer, has gone out and framed someone, he must be liable to as many years of imprisonment as that person would be if convicted and has gone to jail. Then the officer conducting the false arrest must be liable for the same degree of punishment. All this we put up in the committee. Anyway, then the draft report came in December 2020. The draft report was most notable for the complete absence of the word draft. The first paragraph praises me to the skies in the hope that I will see myself honored and pass the report. 45-page report on press freedom did not once have the word censorship or dissent. I did a word search. There are 18 words which are related to press freedoms. I put all those words in the search. Not one of those words came. And instead of what I had suggested, it said, security forces in Kashmir have played a heroic role in protecting the lives and security of journalists. So what did I do? I wrote what I knew the time would come for that. I had my note ready. I wrote a dissent note. I called it independent note and I sent it in. Now when I did that under the UPA government, the note went into the report. Here, remember that this is a committee appointed at the behest of the senior most bureaucrat in the country. I sent the note, no reply. I sent the note 3 times. The committee vanished. The entire bloody committee disappeared. The index monitoring cell, high-powered committee vanished. I sent the report 2 more times. The email ID vanished. Then how do I prove that this happened? 2 ways. Number 1, it was COVID, it was all on Zoom, and I recorded the meetings. I have the recording of, I could not do TV recording, they would know. But I did an audio recording of the meetings of the high-powered committee as a member with a little tape recorder, digital recorder. So we have the chairman saying very important point, we have all this. Then comes the country's leading RTI journalist, works with Indian Express. I told him what had happened. He said, RTI kar denge abhi. He sent 2 RTI questions. 9 questions. Is there such a committee really? Does it exist? Who are its members? How many meetings? Question 3, question 4, question 5. The RTI came back with the reply to 1 and 2. Yes, committee exists. 13-member committee, and yes, it has met, full committee has met 4 times. Question 3 to 9. What is the report? What is the content of the report? Question 3 to 9, answer is not our department. We do not possess this information. So come, my friends, my group of friends, you know, which includes the Prabirs of this world, they were not sympathetic to me when I was complaining. They said you should be grateful. They vanished the reporter and not the, they vanished the report and not the reporter. So you should be grateful, you fellow, to the government. So that is where it lies, that thing. Now, the third thing is the third element of the pandemic. Pandemic 1, COVID. Pandemic 2, inequality. Pandemic 3, which is your area, criminalization of dissent. Friends, please do not think this started with the Modi government. That is not true. Yeah? It really exists for 30-40 years already in a significant way. And once India embraces neoliberalism, the attacks, once India embraces neoliberalism, the attacks and criminalization of everyday life, you know, our laws on forest criminalize almost anything that the Adivasi does. Yeah? And see how difficult it is now for them to assert their rights under a much better framework of Forest Rights Act. Now, by criminalization of dissent, you're seeing that rampant across the country today, but it goes back to the Congress times, it goes back well into that period. Let me tell you about your neighboring, say, nearby state of Odisha. Yeah? This business, every one of you is a lawyer, knows how they write that FIR. Bikash Bhattacharya and 800 others attacked the police station. That leaves that 800 names open. They will harass 6,000 people under those 800 names. They will say all the villages around that area will be tormented for years and years. I went to Koraput jail to meet a professor of chemistry, young guy, assistant professor of chemistry. And then I started looking at what are the laws this is pre-Modi. What are the laws he is arrested under? There were some 27 laws, 27, and one of them was theft of a buffalo. Okay. That young man wouldn't be able to tell one bovine species from another. He is a professor of chemistry. I asked the DGP of Odisha that time, why do you do this? He said, you don't understand. When we put the actual case against them, the magistrate will throw it out. So we put a mix of many types of cases. We can keep getting that fellow back to the police station. We can ensure his good behavior. So then I go to Kalinganagar and I find a couple, Ravi Jarika and his wife, Adivasis, educated, Cuttack University, BScs, never been to a police station in their lives until the agitation begins. Between them now they have 80 cases. SP Uday Kumar in Kudankulam, in the Kudankulam protest, 91 cases. In the POSCO, anti-POSCO case, Comrade Abhay Saab. When Abhay Saab, it's now I have not met him for some years, but whenever I used to meet him, I would say, Comrade Abhay, कितना हो गया? He'd say, हाँ अभी 52. Now 52 cases. I'm saying, you've just destroyed the meaning of law. You've destroyed the meaning of rule of law, of the sense of, you've destroyed democracy when we function like this. Now all this takes a huge leap. All this takes a huge leap from 2014. But even in 2016, when I went to speak at the open teach-in at JNU, which was being brutalized at the time, I told my young JNU descendants, because I was in JNU 77 to 80, which is where I became an activist and a member of the Students' Federation of India. I told the students of JNU, my sympathies are totally with you, but I invite you, welcome to the rest of the country. Because what happened to you today has been happening for decades in the rural countryside, where in the Srikakulam port agitation, a 78-year-old woman who weighs 39 kilograms, 78, she's an agricultural laborer, 25 charges including attempt to murder a police party. She can't lift a sickle. Attempt to murder. But she attacked a police party. This is the thing. This criminalization of dissent is going to be the end of us all if we don't end it. Either we end it or it ends us. So these, that criminalization of dissent is now, and now it is more selectively, hugely targeted at minorities. And I beg you, please do not use this word that the media are using, bulldozer justice. There is no element of justice in it. Bulldozer justice is an oxymoron. What you are witnessing is bulldozer terror directed primarily, if not wholly, at Muslims. Please call a spade a spade. Please be honest and say this is what it is. It's anti-Muslim terror. Not that the other minorities are going to get off. Some of them, a few people in those might believe, like people in my constituency in Mumbai, thought that they're only anti-Muslim. What is Manipur about? Manipur is the Gujarat model applied to Christians in Manipur. That's what it is. What you have done, what you did to Muslims in Gujarat, you have done to Christians in Manipur. This is not going to go down. It's going to intensify. It's going to intensify like anything. Are there bright spots in this? I'll pull it together. Are there bright spots in this? Yes. I think every one of us should learn from two, one before the pandemic, one during the pandemic. It was moving for me that thousands of youngsters, some of them still teenagers, including many of my students, were standing at the gates of their colleges and reading out the preamble of the Constitution during the anti-CAA agitation. What a beautiful sight, heartwarming sight that was. That here was this generation completely cut off from previous generations, from the freedom struggle, but articulating the spirit of the Constitution which is derived from your freedom struggle. For me that was beautiful. I was in tears when I saw all my students in Mumbai gathering at the Govalia tank, historic site of freedom, reading from, of course I did tell them there are a few more pages in the Constitution also worth reading, and it won't kill you to read it, but Anyway, I'm happy you're doing this. I think that was so spontaneous in many ways that the kids came out onto the streets. The second was organized. How has your media ever told you that the farmers' protest at the gates of Delhi was the largest peaceful, constitutional, legitimate, organized protest in the world in the last 3 decades? And organized at the height of the pandemic. 720 farmers died. They died of COVID, they died of police attacks with water cannon in the middle of winter. A 78, 80-year-old man, you hit him with freezing water. People died of hypothermia, they died of COVID, they died of various things. 720 paid with their lives. No compensation, nothing. But what the farmers did, they thought, did they win? Did they end the agrarian crisis? No. Far from it. And they know it. What they did, there are 3 things to know. One, they showed the rest of us the meaning of the word resistance. Do you know the greatest movement before that, more publicized, much more publicized, Occupy Wall Street 2009 in America, where a few thousand youngsters, mainly techies, etc., occupied Zuccotti Park in New York and fought against Wall Street and said, we are the 99%, you are the 1%. How many of you know that it took New York police, NYPD, 9 weeks. After 9 weeks, they were given the order, throw them out, they threw them out. Your Kisans held out 53 weeks until the laws were taken back. That is for us to learn. That is the lesson for us. Yeah, they survived the worst winter in Delhi in 40 years. They survived one of the worst summers in a decade. They survived horrible rains. They went there and they were met with thousands of feet of barbed wire rolls. Yeah, with a government that dug up the highways, violating its own laws on punishment for destruction of public property. They dug 20 feet by 10-foot trenches. They brought paramilitary, they brought police, they brought home guards, you name it. There was a bigger mobilization against your Kisans than on the line of actual control with China. There was more action also. Yeah. Still they held out. They held out. Now they are trying to demonize the farmers, saying these are all Khalistanis. They tried it even there. Let me tell you one thing, my friend. I spoke several times on the platform at Singhu. The first time I went, winter 2020. By the way, I asked my contacts in the BJP, why are you bringing these laws now? At the height of the pandemic, why are you bringing these laws? So I asked my contacts in the BJP, why now? This is, I was asking in September 2020. They said, इसलिए कि अभी सब घर में बैठे हैं डर में. All these farmers are sitting at home in fear. They will not dare resist. What a fatal miscalculation. The farmers at the height of the pandemic marched on Delhi. 100,000 people. They set up a township which still exists. Okay? And they fought, they resisted, they died, and they got those laws withdrawn. Incidentally, do you know how much those laws would affect other citizens? Do you know that one of the worst affected professions would be yours? The profession of occupation of lawyers would be one of the worst affected especially district court lawyers, because the three laws bar the jurisdiction of the civil courts, yeah, and replaces them with appellate tribunals at which Naib, Tehsildar, Deputy Collector, and these people are going to take your position as a peasant against Ambani, against Adani. Not even against the local shopkeeper they will stand for you. Yeah. So in fact, for once in its life, the Bar Council Delhi wrote a letter to the President saying this is going to devastate the legal profession. You know? Most of those district cases are farming related, land, whatever. So that is something that you should know. The point I'm making is the farmers didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for you, fought for me, fought for every one of us, because the laws were negating the fundamental right to legal remedy. When you say the civil court's jurisdiction is barred, you are taking away the Article 32, you're taking away the fundamental right to legal remedy from every citizen of the country, not just farmers. It's a blanket ban on the court's jurisdiction. Yeah. Those farmers fought for all of us. I think what they showed us is that struggle, movements, and lastly, the social movements. Look, there were many contradictions in the farmers. There were farmers sitting next to their agricultural laborers. They had serious disputes between them, but they fought. I interviewed the agricultural laborers. They said, yes, we know these guys, tomorrow we'll have to fight them again. But if they lose now, all of us are lost. And I will say this. Do not remain silent in the face of the onslaught of minorities. There are two categories of people you need to be worried about. One is the minorities, and another is a very, very important category. The biggest target of the Hindutvavadi violence is not any secularist. Within secularists, they have focused their attention, their importance on rationalists. Look, rationalists are the people whom they kill. Yeah? Rationalists are the people whom they kill. Who was Narendra Dhabolkar? Who was Comrade Gobind Pansare? Comrade Pansare of CPI died in the wool rationalist. Narendra Dhabolkar, founder of the rationalist movement in Maharashtra. Professor M.M. Kalburgi, rationalist. Gauri Lankesh, rationalist. The four of them had three things in common. They were all rationalists. Yeah. They were all journalists. Dhabolkar and Gauri ran their own magazines and newspapers. Pansare and Kalburgi were prolific columnists. And their worst sin, they were journalists in Indian languages, which they fear much more than they fear a journalist. That's why, by the way, in Pari we publish every day in 15 languages. Language and culture are going to be the major areas of challenge to the fundamentalists. How have they won the North? It's not just economics. It's not that, girls program in Madhya Pradesh. Culture and language have everything to do with it. I think it is absolutely correct for people in different parts of the country to protect and cherish their language and their culture. And that's what Indian democracy is about, that diversity. Yeah? We have before us the examples of the CAA, where the young people taught us something. We have before us the example of the Kisan movement, where the farmers taught us something. We have before us the example of the working class of this country that last year held, earlier, the biggest strike in the world, biggest general strike in the world, maximum number of people participating. Yeah. But it means that we too we also join that struggle, we also conduct, and in that the role of lawyers is going to be intense, traumatic and crucial, because the biggest tactic they are using now is, criminalization of difference and dissent. Look, nowadays they are not going to arrest us under sedition. They are going to arrest us for money laundering. They are going to arrest us for, various cases which are strengthened greatly by the new laws that they have brought in. On October 3rd this year, 46 journalists were raided in Delhi just from connected to NewsClick alone. Look, where are the lawyers? I'm wanting. Even today those 46 journalists are unable to retrieve their laptops, their cell phones, their hard disks, any electronic device, and a court in Delhi rules that there is no hurry to return them their devices. You are paralyzing a journalist by doing that. Yeah? And they are going up. Many people don't realize Praveer Purkayastha, who is being made the target, the example to scare everybody else. Praveer Purkayastha was one of the very first people to go to jail during the emergency under the Congress. Now he goes to jail under the BJP on this. But the laws under which he is now being prosecuted, these are a disgrace to any democracy. I think that please look out for those smaller, lesser known journalists, reporters, stringers in your societies who are being harassed and, Now, by the way, Mr. Adani has filed so many cases of libel against a couple of journalists, and their life goes in court appearances. I think we all need to come much closer to each other. Can this be defeated? Yes, it can be defeated. Will it be defeated? That depends on you and me. Thank you.